The summer of 1980 in rural Ohio was a haze of golden fields and endless skies, where life moved slowly and trust was as common as the cornstalks swaying in the breeze. I'm Mary Thompson, and back then I was a farmer's daughter turned farmer's wife, married to my high school sweetheart, Ethan Carter. Ethan was a soldier stationed at Fort Campbell, a good 300 miles from our little town of Willow Creek. His letters arrived like clockwork, full of promises about the life we'd build once he finished his service, a cozy house, kids running through the yard, maybe even a trip to see the lights of Chicago. I clung to those promises, especially when I discovered I was 6 months pregnant with our first child. My heart swelled with hope, picturing Ethan cradling our baby, his blue eyes crinkling with that smile I fell for at 16. But life has a way of shattering dreams. That summer, Ethan's twin brother Luke died in a car crash on Route 68, leaving behind his pregnant wife Sarah. The news hit the Carter family like a sledgehammer. My in-laws Margaret and Henry Carter were inconsolable, their grief spilling over into every corner of our weathered farmhouse. Sarah, frail and tearful, became their sole focus. She was 6 months pregnant too, carrying Luke's child, and the Carters treated her like a fragile heirloom, fussing over her every need. One evening, as fireflies danced outside, Margaret pulled Ethan aside in the kitchen, her voice low but firm. "Ethan, Luke's gone, but his baby ain't. You gotta step up, look after Sarah. It's what he'd want." Henry nodded, his weathered hands gripping a coffee mug. "Your brother sacrificed everything for this family. He worked double shifts at the mill to keep us afloat. You owe him." I overheard from the hallway, my hands cradling my swollen belly. The idea seemed absurd. Ethan was my husband, not Sarah's. I was pregnant too, waddling through morning sickness and backaches. Why should he divide his time? My best friend Clara, a no-nonsense single mother who ran her farm down the road, warned me over coffee at the diner. "Mary, don't let them guilt you into this. The Carters are old school. They think a man's duty is to every woman in the family. You say yes and you'll be carrying both households." I agreed with her, my stubborn streak flaring. I had no intention of letting Ethan play house with Sarah. But when I confronted him that night, his voice softened, his hands finding mine. "Mary, please," he said, his eyes searching mine in the dim glow of our bedroom lamp. "Luke begged me before he died, said to make sure Sarah and the baby were okay. He gave up so much for me, for all of us. I'm not leaving you. I love you. It's just some money, maybe a few visits to check on her. Once her baby's born, she'll manage. I promise." His words were a mix of logic and emotion tugging at my heart. I loved Ethan fiercely. His steady presence was my anchor since we were kids, sneaking kisses behind the bleachers. And as a soon-to-be mother, I felt a pang for Sarah, widowed and alone. Maybe I was naive, softened by the hormones or the humid Ohio night, but I nodded. "Okay, Ethan. Don't forget us." That decision haunts me now, but it's also why I'm telling this story. If this tale of trust and betrayal grips you, hit that like button, comment about a time you faced a tough choice, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that pull no punches. Your support keeps these truths alive, and trust me, this journey only gets wilder. Looking back, I see the cracks forming. Ethan's letters grew shorter, his promises vaguer. I'd sit on the porch, rereading his words, convincing myself he was busy. Meanwhile, the Carters' farmhouse became Sarah's sanctuary. Margaret cooked her hearty meals, fresh cornbread, pot roast, apple pie, while I scraped by on canned beans and stale bread. Henry would pat Sarah's shoulder, saying, "Rest, girl. You're carrying Luke's legacy." Me, I was hauling water from the well, weeding the vegetable patch, and feeding the chickens, my belly growing heavier each day. The townsfolk noticed, whispering at the general store about how the Carters favored their poor widowed Sarah over their daughter-in-law. Clara, ever my rock, would shake her head. "Mary, you're too good for this. Ethan's got no clue what you're enduring." I didn't want to believe I'd made a mistake. Ethan's love was my compass, and I told myself this was temporary. Sarah would have her baby find her footing, and I'd have Ethan back. But deep down, a flicker of doubt grew like a weed in the cracks of my heart. In the 1980s in rural Ohio, where Reagan's optimism was starting to trickle down, women like me were expected to endure and keep the home fires burning while men served or grieved. I was part of that world, bound by love and duty, but I didn't know then that I was stepping into a trap that would take a miracle to escape. The Ohio sun beat down relentlessly that summer, turning the fields into a patchwork of gold and dust. I was 6 months pregnant, my body aching from dawn to dusk, but the Carter farmhouse offered no reprieve. Sarah, also 6 months along, was treated like royalty. While Henry built a crib for Luke's baby, Margaret would fuss over her brewing herbal teas and insisting she rest on the faded couch. On the other hand, I was up before sunrise, hauling buckets of feed for the pigs, scrubbing laundry on a washboard, and hoeing rows of corn under a sky that offered no mercy. My hands blistered, my back screamed, but I kept going, fueled by the thought of Ethan's return and our little family. Sarah's frailty was the Carters' obsession. "She's delicate," Margaret would say, her voice dripping with pity as she sliced apples for Sarah's dessert. "Can't risk Luke's child." Meanwhile, I ate what was left: overcooked greens, crusty bread, sometimes nothing if the day's work ran long. Ethan's military pay, which he sent home monthly, never reached me. I found out later that it went straight to Sarah's needs: new dresses, vitamins, even a radio to keep her entertained. His letters, arriving in thin envelopes, urged me to be understanding. "Mary, Sarah's struggling. Mom and Dad need your help to keep her strong. You're my rock, you know that." I'd trace his handwriting, clinging to his words, ignoring the sting of being an afterthought. Clara saw through it all. One evening, as we sat on her porch, her 2 kids playing in the yard, she lit a cigarette and fixed me with a hard stare. "Mary, you're killing yourself for a family that doesn't give a damn. Sarah's playing the damsel, and Ethan's too far away to see it. You gotta stand up for yourself." Clara knew hardship. Her husband was a trucker, gone months at a time, leaving her to run their farm alone. She'd fought tooth and nail to keep her land, her pride, a shield against the town's gossip. Her words stung, but I brushed them off. "It's just until the babies are born," I said, more to convince myself than her. Ethan promised. The truth was, I was drowning. Willow Creek was a tight-knit place where neighbors helped neighbors, but it was also steeped in tradition. Women were expected to hold the family together no matter the cost. The 1980s were changing things. Reagan's talk of prosperity was on every radio, and women in cities were starting to demand more, but time moved more slowly out here. I felt the weight of those expectations, the silent judgment from church ladies who'd nod sympathetically but whisper about my duty to the Carters. With her soft voice and delicate frame, Sarah fit their ideal of a grieving widow. I was just the workhorse, the one who didn't complain. As my pregnancy progressed, the disparity grew unbearable. Sarah lounged, her hands soft and unscarred, while mine were rough as sandpaper. One day I dropped a jar of preserves, too tired to catch it, and Sarah just watched, not lifting a finger. Margaret scolded me for the mess, her voice sharp as a switch. "Careful, Mary. Those are for Sarah." I bit my tongue, but the resentment festered. At night, I'd lie awake, my baby kicking, wondering if Ethan knew how uneven the scales had tipped. His letters were my lifeline, each one promising he'd be home soon, that he loved me. But they never mentioned my struggles, only Sarah's fragile state. Clara's farm became my refuge. She'd share her coffee, her stories, her strength. "I was like you once," she told me one afternoon, her eyes distant. Thought love meant carrying everyone's burdens. Took me years to learn it's okay to put yourself first. Her words stuck with me, but love blinded me. I kept working, kept believing, even as the Carters' favoritism chipped away at my spirit. I didn't know then that I was being molded into their servant, that Sarah's helplessness was a performance, or that Ethan's promises were as hollow as the wind whistling through the barn. All I knew was the ache in my bones and the hope that kept me tethered to a man who was slipping away. The autumn of 1980 crept into Willow Creek, Ohio, with a chill that settled into my bones. At 9 months pregnant, I was a shadow of myself, my body worn from months of relentless farm work, while the Carter family coddled Sarah, their widowed daughter-in-law. With its peeling paint and creaky floors, the farmhouse felt more like a prison than a home. Margaret, my mother-in-law, ruled it with an iron tongue, her eyes sharp as she watched me haul water-weed the garden and feed the livestock. Sarah, also 9 months pregnant, spent her days on the couch sipping tea and nibbling on Margaret's homemade biscuits, her delicate frame shielded from any labor. I was invisible to them, my own pregnancy, an afterthought, my exhaustion dismissed as duty. One crisp October morning, with the air heavy from an overnight rain, Margaret barked at me to fetch water from the well. My belly felt like a boulder, each step a struggle, but I obeyed, knowing defiance would only bring harsher words. The path to the well was slick with mud, and as I lugged the heavy bucket, my foot slipped. I felt hard pain shooting through me as the bucket crashed to the ground. Warmth spread between my legs, blood, too much blood. I screamed, clutching my stomach, but the world blurred. I don't remember how I got to the hospital, only fragments: Margaret's annoyed sigh, the jolt of the truck, and a nurse's voice fading as I slipped into darkness. When I woke, days had passed. My body felt like it had been trampled every breath of labor. Ethan was there, his face pale, his uniform rumpled from his rush home from Fort Campbell. "Mary," he whispered, his hand brushing mine, "you're okay. We have a daughter. Lily." His voice cracked with relief, but I could barely process the words. Lily was born, but the delivery had nearly killed me. I was too weak to hold her, my body drained of strength and milk. Sarah, who had given birth to a healthy boy, Logan, around the same time, stepped in. She fed Lily her own milk abundant, and for a brief moment I was grateful. Her act of kindness felt like a bridge between us, a shared motherhood in a house divided. The Carters softened during those weeks. Margaret brought me broth, her usual sharpness dulled, and Henry even offered a gruff, "Good job, Mary." Ethan, home on leave, was tender in a way I hadn't seen in months. He'd sit by my bedside telling stories of the base, his voice warm as he described our future. "We'll get through this, Mary. You, me, and Lily were a family." His words were a lifeline pulling me from the haze of pain. I clung to them, ignoring the ache in my heart that whispered he hadn't been there when I needed him most. In rural Ohio, where community was everything, those fleeting moments of care felt like a gift. The church ladies dropped off casseroles praising my strength, but their eyes lingered on Sarah, the poor widow who'd saved my baby. As I recovered, I poured my gratitude into work. Before dawn, I was back in the fields, hoeing and hauling, determined to repay the Carters' brief kindness. Tiny and fragile Lily was left in Sarah's care during the day, her soft cries echoing from the house as I toiled. Clara, my friend and neighbor, watched me with growing concern. Over coffee at her kitchen table, her kids napping nearby, she leaned forward, her voice low. "Mary, you're killing yourself. You almost died giving birth and you're back out there like nothing happened. Sarah's got no business playing mother to your kid while you break your back." Clara's own life raising two boys alone while her husband drove trucks across the Midwest made her words heavy with truth. But I shook my head stubborn. "It's temporary, Clara. Ethan's coming home soon. We'll be okay." In the 1980s, America rural life was a grind, especially for women like me. Reagan's promises of prosperity were on the radio, but out here we lived by older rules, family first, no matter the cost. I saw myself as a good wife and mother carrying the weight for Ethan, Lily, and the others. But as I lugged hay bales under the fading autumn light, my body still weak from childbirth, I felt a crack in my resolve. Sarah's soft hands, Margaret's cold orders, and Ethan's distant letters were pieces of a puzzle I didn't yet understand. I was holding the family together, but at what cost to myself? The answer would come, but not before the world I knew was shattered. 2 years passed in Willow Creek, each day a blur of labor and love for my daughter Lily. By 1982, she was a frail toddler, her legs too weak to walk, her body trembling with every attempt to stand. Logan, Sarah's son, ran and laughed in the yard, his health contrasting with Lily's struggles. The Carter farmhouse remained a shrine to Sarah, who lounged with novels while Margaret and Henry doted on her and Logan. I was still the workhorse up at dawn to milk cows, tend crops, scrub floors, my hands calloused, my body lean from endless toil. Ethan's letters were sporadic now, each one urging me to keep the family strong while praising Sarah's delicate nature. His military pay still went to her, leaving me to scrape by on what little the farm produced. One spring morning, as I watched Lily crawl across the floor, her eyes bright but her body failing, I knew something was wrong. The Carters dismissed her weakness, blaming it on my fall during pregnancy. "It's just how she is," Mary Margaret said, her voice cold. "Focus on the farm, but a mother's instinct is a force of nature." I borrowed Clara's truck and drove Lily to the county hospital an hour away in Dayton. The doctor's diagnosis hit like a thunderbolt: polio. My heart sank, memories of 1950s outbreaks flickering from childhood stories. "It's treatable," the doctor said, "but it'll take years of therapy, maybe surgery. Expensive, too." I knotted my throat tight, vowing to save her. Back home, I told the Carters, expecting support. Instead, they scoffed. "Waste of money." Henry grunted, whittling a stick on the porch. "She's disabled, Mary. Accept it." Margaret chimed in. "We ain't got cash for that. You want to throw away Ethan's pay, go ahead, but don't expect us to help." Ethan, who was home briefly on leave, sided with them. Sitting at the kitchen table, his uniform crisp, he took my hand. "Mary, we can have another kid. A healthy one. Lily's. It's fate. Let's not fight it." His words cut deeper than any knife. I pulled my hand away, tears burning. "She's our daughter, Ethan. If you won't fight for her, I will." From that moment, I was alone. By day, I worked the farm planting corn, feeding pigs, repairing fences under the Ohio sun. I drove to clinics at night seeking doctors who could help Lily. The Carters' cruelty grew bolder. Margaret spread rumors at church whispering I was cursed, that Lily's illness was my fault, that Luke's death was somehow my doing. The townsfolk, steeped in rural Ohio's blend of faith and gossip, began to shun me, their casseroles replaced by pitying glances. Clara was my only ally. Over late-night coffee, her kitchen a haven, she shared her battles, how she'd fought to keep her farm after her husband's debts nearly sank her. "You're stronger than you know, Mary," she said, her voice fierce. "Don't let them break you." I learned massage and physical therapy techniques, spending hours each night working Lily's legs, her small whimpers spurring me on. I found a kind doctor in Dayton who taught me acupuncture, and his gentle hands guided mine. Every penny from my vegetable sales went to Lily's treatments, leaving me to eat scraps. The 1980s were dawning, with change, women's rights were in the news, cities buzzing with new opportunities. But in Willow Creek, I was trapped in a world where a woman's worth was her labor. Yet at age 3, Lily's first shaky step was worth every blister, every sleepless night. Her smile lit up my world, but the Carters' indifference and Ethan's absence darkened it. I wrote to him begging for support, but his replies were cold. "Focus on the family, Mary. Don't waste time on doctors." I began to see the truth. Ethan wasn't just distant. He was slipping away, and I was fighting a battle no one else cared to win. By the spring of 1982, Willow Creek, Ohio's fields were bursting with new growth, but my life felt barren. I was 26, my hands rough from years of farm work, my heart hardened by the Carter family's neglect. Lily, my daughter, was 5, her polio finally yielding to relentless therapy. She could walk now, her steps slow but steady, each one a victory I'd clawed from despair. I'd spent countless nights massaging her legs, driving to Dayton for treatments, and scrimping every penny from vegetable sales to pay for them. My husband, Ethan, was a ghost. His letters from Fort Campbell were rare, and his military pay was funneled to his parents and Sarah, his brother's widow. The Carters, Margaret and Henry, treated me like a servant, while Sarah lounged in their farmhouse, her son Logan thriving at her side. That April, Ethan returned, his uniform crisp, his eyes guarded. He'd been promoted to sergeant, a milestone with a perk permission to bring family to the base. I expected him to say we'd finally be together, him and Lily. Instead, he sat me down at the kitchen table, Margaret and Henry hovering nearby. "Mary," he said, his voice low, "I'm taking Sarah and Logan to the base. It's what Luke would have wanted." The words hit like a slap. "Sarah, not me, Logan, not Lily." I stared at him, my throat tight. "What about us, Ethan? Your wife, your daughter?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "Sarah's alone." "Mary, she needs help. You're strong, you can handle things here." Margaret chimed in, her voice sharp. "You haven't gotten pregnant again in 5 years, Mary. Likely never will. Logan's our first grandson, Luke's legacy. He needs a future." Henry nodded, his eyes cold. "If you don't like it, we can arrange a divorce." The threat hung heavy, a reminder of rural Ohio's unspoken rules. Family loyalty trumped personal pain, especially for women. In 1982, divorce was a scandal in Willow Creek, a mark of failure that could ostracize me from the church and community. I thought of Lily, her fragile legs, her bright smile. Without Ethan's support, how could I keep fighting for her? Swallowing my pride, I nodded, my heart splintering, as Ethan packed to leave with Sarah and Logan. The months that followed were a blur of labor and loneliness. I worked the farm, tending corn, feeding pigs, repairing fences, while caring for Lily. Clara, my friend and neighbor, became my lifeline. Over coffee in her cluttered kitchen, she shared her own struggles, a husband gone for months, a farm teetering on debt, and a town quick to judge a woman who fought back. "You're carrying too much, Mary," she said, her eyes fierce. "Ethan's abandoned you, and the Carters are using you. Don't let them win." Her words echoed, but I clung to hope, writing Ethan letters about Lily's progress and begging his attention. His replies were cold. "Keep the family strong, Mary." By Lily's 5th birthday, my efforts paid off. She walked across the yard, her laughter a melody that drowned out the Carters' cruelty. I wrote Ethan, my heart soaring, expecting him to share my joy, but his silence was deafening. Clara urged me to confront him, to demand answers, but fear held me back. In rural Ohio, where Reagan's optimism clashed with the grind of farm life, women like me were taught to endure, not to fight. Yet as I watched Lily take her steps, I felt a spark of defiance. I'd saved her alone, maybe I didn't need Ethan. But before I could act, he returned, his arrival, heralding a betrayal that would shatter everything I believed. The summer of 1982 brought a restless heat to Willow Creek, mirroring the turmoil in my heart. A month after Lily's 5th birthday, Ethan's return should have been a reunion. Instead, it was a trap. He announced he'd take Lily and me to Fort Campbell, a chance to escape the Carters' farmhouse and start anew. My hope flared, but it was short-lived. Days before we were to leave, Margaret fell down the stairs, clutching her leg in dramatic pain. Henry insisted I stay to care for her, claiming it was my duty. Torn but obedient, Ethan took Lily and left, promising to return soon. I was stranded nursing Margaret's feigned injury, my dreams of a new life slipping away. Clara, my confidant, visited one evening, her face grim. Over whiskey in her dimly lit kitchen, she dropped a bombshell. Mary, I was in Dayton yesterday at the hospital. Saw Ethan there with Sarah. She's pregnant twins by the look of her belly. Everyone at the base thinks they're married. Her words were a knife to my gut. Sarah and Ethan living as husband and wife, I couldn't breathe, the betrayal sinking in. Clara, who'd faced her own husband's infidelity years ago, gripped my hand. You gotta see for yourself, Mary. Don't let them play you for a fool. I took her truck and drove to Fort Campbell, Lily's absence a weight in my chest. At the base, I found Sarah in a cozy villa, her expression smug, as she lounged with 2 children, a girl and a boy, both toddlers, the girl a mirror of Sarah the boy. Ethan's spitting image. You didn't know, she taunted, her voice dripping with triumph. Ethan and I started the day we arrived. These are our twins. And Lily, she's mine, not yours. Your baby died at birth. Margaret and Henry swapped her to keep you working like a dog. She laughed, admitting they'd faked injuries to trap me, ensuring I wouldn't interfere with their perfect life. Rage consumed me. I saw red, my hands trembling as I grabbed a kitchen knife. You monster! I screamed, lunging at Sarah. She shrieked, dodging, but Lily, who'd been brought to the base, cried out, Mommy, stop! Her voice froze me, and guards burst in, guns drawn. A shot rang out, pain seared my chest, and I collapsed, blood pooling beneath me. As my vision faded, a blinding light enveloped me, and a voice, calm, otherworldly, whispered, Your pain demands justice. Live again. The world dissolved, and I felt my soul pulled backward, time unraveling like a thread. I awoke in 1980, clutching a letter I'd written about Lily's first steps, the ink still wet. It was the day Ethan announced his plan to take Sarah to the base. My past life flooded back, every betrayal, every lie. The voice's promise echoed justice. I was reborn not by chance, but by a force that saw my suffering and gave me a second chance. Clara's voice snapped me out of my daze, her truck idling outside. Mary, Ethan's back. Hurry home. Her legs unscarred confirmed the miracle. I was back in time, before Clara's accident, before the worst betrayals. I ran home, my heart pounding with purpose. Lily was in the yard, gripping a chair and practicing her steps. I'd fought for her once, and now, armed with the truth, I'd fight for justice. The Carters. Ethan, Sarah, they'd face the reckoning I'd been reborn to deliver. The Ohio sun hung low over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the dusty yard of the Carter farmhouse. It was 1980 again, and I, Mary Thompson, had been reborn. I stood frozen, clutching a letter I'd written in my past life, the ink smearing under my trembling fingers. It was the day I'd celebrated Lily's first steps, her polio-defeated legs wobbling as she gripped a chair. The memories of my previous life now tainted the joy of that moment, Ethan's betrayal, Sarah's smug confession, the truth that Lily wasn't mine, but Sarah's, swapped at birth to keep me enslaved to the Carters. As I died bleeding out on the floor of Sarah's villa, a celestial voice had whispered, Your pain demands justice. Live again. That promise burned in my chest, a divine mandate to rewrite my fate. Clara's voice jolted me back to the present, her truck rumbling outside. Mary, Ethan's back. Get home quickly. Her face, unscarred by the rock slide that would cripple her in my past life, was a reminder of the second chance. I sprinted home, the letter crumpled in my fist, my mind racing with the horrors I'd endured, years of toil, Margaret and Henry's cruelty, Ethan's affair with Sarah. Lily was in the yard, her tiny hands clutching a chair, practicing the steps I'd fought so hard to make possible. Her smile pierced me, but now I knew she was Sarah's daughter, a truth that twisted love into rage. I wouldn't let them win again. Inside the farmhouse, I overheard Ethan and his parents plotting. Margaret's voice was sharp, slicing through the thin walls. Ethan, you're promoted. Take Sarah and Logan to the base. They need you. Sarah played her part, her tone soft. Oh, I couldn't. That's Mary's place. Henry scoffed. Mary. She's useless, always whining about that disabled girl. Ethan hesitated, his voice low. She's still my wife. Margaret snapped. She's lazy, Ethan. Sarah's the one keeping this family together. Their lies, so familiar from my past life, fueled my resolve. I wasn't the naive Mary anymore. I stepped into the yard, my gaze cold. Ethan turned, irritation flashing across his face. Where have you been, Mary? I met his eyes, my voice steady. Working, Ethan. Someone's got to keep this farm running while your precious Sarah lounges. Or didn't you notice his face darkened, fed by Margaret's lies? Don't start with that. I know you've been slacking. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Slacking. Let's ask the town who's been hauling hay and feeding pigs. Or better yet, where's the money you send home? I haven't seen a dime. Margaret flinched, her eyes darting to Henry. Ethan's brow furrowed, doubt creeping in. The Carters panicked, their plan unraveling. Margaret lunged at me, her hand raised, but I caught her wrist, my grip firm. I said, touch me, and we'll settle this with the town council, my voice ice. Let's see who they believe. Sarah Ever, the actress, clutched her chest and collapsed, faking a faint. Ethan and Henry rushed her to the clinic, leaving me alone in the yard. I marched to the chicken coop, grabbed a rooster, and slit its throat, blood spraying the dirt. It wasn't just defiance, it was a vow. The Carters. Ethan, Sarah, they'd pay for every lie, every betrayal. Clara found me later, her eyes wide. Mary, what's gotten into you? You're different. We sat on her porch, the Ohio night buzzing with crickets. Clara, who'd fought her battles against a cheating husband and a judgmental town, saw the fire in me. I've been given a chance to fix things, I said, my voice low. I know things, Clara, things that haven't happened yet. She didn't press her trust, a quiet strength. In 1980s rural Ohio, where women were expected to bow to family and tradition, my rebellion was a spark. Reagan's America promised opportunity, but survival meant breaking the rules here. I'd use my past life's knowledge to dismantle the Carters' lies, starting with Ethan's unquestioning loyalty. Justice wasn't just coming, it was mine to deliver. The morning after my stand in the yard, Willow Creek buzzed with whispers. The townsfolk gathered at the general store eyed me differently, not with pity, but curiosity. Mary Thompson, was no longer the silent workhorse of the Carter family. Reborn with the memories of my past life, I carried a fire that 1980s rural Ohio wasn't ready for. With its sagging porch and secrets, the Carter farmhouse was my battlefield. Ethan, home on leave, was set to decide who'd join him at Fort Campbell. Sarah and her son Logan, or Lily, and me. In my past life, I'd let them bully me into submission. This time I'd turn their lies against them. I worked the farm as usual, but my eyes were sharp, watching for opportunities. Margaret and Henry, emboldened by Ethan's presence, doubled down on their narrative. At breakfast, Margaret sneered, Mary's been shirking Ethan, always running off, leaving us to care for Lily. I set down my coffee, my voice calm, but cutting. Funny, Margaret. Last I checked, I was plowing fields while Sarah was reading magazines. Where's Ethan's pay going? Not to me. Ethan's fork paused, his eyes flickering with doubt. Henry grunted. Don't stir trouble, Mary. I smiled cold. Trouble. Let's take it to the town council. They'll love to hear about the money you've been pocketing. The room went silent. Sarah, sitting primly, clutched her napkin, her face pale. Ethan stood, his voice tense. What's this about money? Before Margaret could spin another lie, I stepped closer. You send home your pay. I've never seen it. Ask your parents where it's gone. Margaret stammered. We use it for the house food bills. I laughed, bills like Sarah's new dresses. Ethan's jaw tightened, his trust in his parents cracking. The Carters' facade was crumbling, and I savored every fracture. Later at Clara's farm, I shared my plan over coffee, her kids playing in the yard. Clara, who'd fought her own battles against a town that judged her for standing up to her husband, nodded. You're playing with fire, Mary, but I'm with you. They've used you long enough. Her strength, forged in years of running her farm alone, mirrored mine. In rural Ohio, where Reagan's promises of prosperity felt distant, women like us were expected to endure, not rebel. But I was done bowing. I knew from my past life that Sarah and Ethan would start their affair at the base, and I'd let them think they'd won until I could expose them. Back at the farmhouse, Margaret tried to regain control. She cornered me in the kitchen, her voice a hiss. You're causing trouble, Mary. Stop it or you'll regret it. I met her gaze, unflinching. Regret like slaving for you while Sarah plays princess. Try me, Margaret. She raised her hand, but I stepped forward, daring her. She backed off, fear flickering in her eyes. That evening, Sarah pulled her usual stunt, collapsing in a dramatic faint, clutching her chest. Ethan and Henry rushed her to the town clinic, leaving me alone. I marched to the barn, grabbed a rooster, and slit its throat, the blood a symbol of my resolve. The Carters thought they could break me, but I was beginning. The next day, word spread. A neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, stopped me at the store. "Mary, you're working that farm alone, aren't you? Always see you in the fields." Her words, loud enough for others to hear, planted seeds of doubt about the Carters' lies. Ethan overheard, his face troubled. At the clinic, Sarah played the victim, tears in her eyes. "I don't want to cause a rift, Ethan," she whispered. But I saw through her act, and so did he faintly. I leaned against the clinic wall, my voice loud enough for bystanders. "Funny how Sarah's always sick when questions get asked. Where's that money, Ethan?" The crowd murmured, and Ethan's doubt grew a crack I'd widen until their world collapsed. The summer of 1980 in Willow Creek, Ohio, hummed with tension as I, Mary Thompson, wielded my reborn knowledge like a blade. Armed with memories of my past life, Ethan's affair with Sarah, the truth that Lily was Sarah's daughter, and the Carters' manipulation, I was no longer the submissive wife who toiled in silence. The Carter farmhouse, once my prison, was now my stage. At home on leave, Ethan was torn between his parents' demands to take Sarah and her son Logan to Fort Campbell and the cracks I'd exposed in their lies. Once swayed by Margaret's gossip, the townsfolk were starting to see the truth, their whispers at the general store shifting from pity to respect for my relentless work. I struck while the iron was hot. At the town clinic where Sarah had faked another fainting spell, I confronted Ethan in front of a crowd. "Where's the money you send home, Ethan?" I asked, my voice carrying. "I've been breaking my back on your farm but haven't seen a cent. Ask your parents or Sarah." Faces turned, murmurs rippling through the onlookers. Mrs. Jenkins, a church matron, nodded. "She's right, Ethan. Mary's out there dawn to dusk. Always has been." Ethan's eyes darted to Margaret, who stammered, "We used it for the house for Sarah's boy." But the doubt in his face was a victory, a chink in the Carter's armor. Later at Clara's farm, I laid out my plan over coffee, her kitchen a haven from the Carter's venom. Clara, who'd fought her own battles against a cheating husband and a town quick to judge, leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mary, but it's time someone turned the tables on them." Her story, losing her farm to debt, clawing it back through sheer will, mirrored my resolve. I told her about my past life, the betrayal, the divine voice that sent me back. "I'm letting Ethan take Sarah to the base," I said. "They'll think they've won, but I'll expose them." Clara gripped my hand. "You're not alone, Mary. I've got your back." My chance came sooner than expected. I followed Sarah to the church where she played the grieving widow for the congregation. As she tearfully begged for prayers, I stepped forward, my voice calm but sharp. "Prayers for what, Sarah? For the money you've taken from Ethan, or for the act you put on while I work the farm?" The crowd gasped, heads turning. Sarah's face paled, her fragile facade cracking. "Mary, how could you?" she whispered, tears welling. I smiled coldly. "Give me all of the money Ethan sent, and I might let you go to the base. Otherwise, I'll tell the military you're posing as his wife." Her eyes widened, fear replacing her act. 3 days later, she handed me a wad of cash, $2,000 more than I'd seen in my past life. "Now beg," I said, my voice low. "Show me you mean it." Humiliated, she knelt, her head bowed as I savored the moment. But my work wasn't done. I knew from my past life that Clara would be disabled in a rock slide this week, a tragedy that had left her bedridden. I watched her farm closely, and on the fateful day I was there pulling her from the path of falling rocks. She was bruised with a sprained ankle, but alive, her legs intact. "How'd you know?" she gasped, clinging to me. I just smiled, the weight of changing her fate lifting my spirits. We sat in the hospital, her hand in mine, as she shared more of her past, how she'd rebuilt her life after her husband's betrayal, earning the town's respect. "You're doing the same, Mary," she said. "You're rewriting your story." In 1980s rural Ohio, where women were expected to endure in silence, my actions were a rebellion. Reagan's America preached self-reliance, but in Willow Creek tradition demanded sacrifice. I was breaking those chains using the Carters' greed against them. I let Ethan believe I'd accepted his plan to take Sarah, knowing their affair would ignite at the base. My $2,000 was a weapon, a means to start anew, but first I'd ensure their downfall. As I returned to the farmhouse, Lily's laughter echoed from the yard, a reminder of the child I'd fought for, even if she wasn't mine. Justice was close, and I was ready to strike. The air at Fort Campbell was thick with the scent of pine and diesel, a world away from Willow Creek's dusty fields. It was late summer 1980, and I, Mary Thompson, had followed Ethan and Sarah to the military base, my reborn knowledge a map to their ruin. In my past life, their affair had flourished here, Sarah passing as Ethan's wife, bearing his twins, while I slaved for the Carters. This time I'd expose them before they could build their lie. Lily, the child I'd raised as my own, was with me, her polio-weakened legs a reminder of my sacrifices, and the truth that she was Sarah's daughter, swapped at birth to keep me bound. Ethan had taken Sarah and Logan to the base, believing I'd stay behind, broken and compliant. But I'd planned every step. At the base, Sarah lived in a tidy villa, her smug smile greeting me as I arrived unannounced. "You can't stop us, Mary," she said, her voice dripping with confidence. I didn't answer, my eyes on the crowd of military spouses outside their chatter, a backdrop to my plan. I waited until Ethan returned from a drill, his uniform crisp, his face weary. Then, with Lily at my side, I stepped into the sunlight and let my voice carry. "Ethan Carter, you left your wife and daughter to play house with your sister-in-law." The crowd froze, heads turning. "I raised a disabled child, worked on your farm while you sent money to her." Ethan's face paled, his eyes darting to Sarah, who stood frozen in the villa's doorway. The spouses erupted, their voices sharp with contempt. Shameless one hissed, "Abandoning his own kid for her." Another spat. Lily, clinging to my hand, crawled forward, her voice clear despite her frailty. "Please, Aunt Sarah, give my daddy back. We don't need money, just him." Her plea, raw and desperate, shattered the crowd's restraint. A woman in a floral dress snapped, "What kind of man leaves a disabled child?" Ethan stood, rooted shame etching his face as Sarah stammered, "It's not what you think." I didn't stop. "Not what I think. You're pregnant, Sarah, twins by Ethan. You told me yourself." The crowd gasped, and Ethan's head snapped to Sarah, her belly slightly rounded under her dress. In my past life, I'd learned of their affair too late, but now I'd caught them before it could solidify. "You think the military will let this slide?" I said, my voice loud. A sergeant living with his sister-in-law passing her off as his wife. The spouse's outrage grew, their words cutting. "Disgraceful. He's no soldier." Guards approached, their faces stern, and I knew the investigation was inevitable. Ethan tried to speak, his voice hoarse. "Mary, I cut him off, my hand slashing the air. "Save it, Ethan. You chose her over us." Lily's tears soaked my skirt, and I lifted her, her weight light but heavy with meaning. The guards escorted Ethan away, their badges glinting in the sun. Sarah, sobbing, was led to a separate office. The military's code was strict. Moral misconduct was a stain that couldn't be ignored. Within days, the verdict came. Ethan was discharged for inappropriate conduct, which ruined his career. He and Sarah were returned to Willow Creek, their reputations in tatters. Clara met me at the base's gate, her ankle still bandaged from the rock slide I'd saved her from. "You did it, Mary," she said, her smile fierce. "They're finished." Her own fight, reclaiming her farm, defying the town's judgment, made her my mirror. In 1980s America, where rural communities clung to tradition, my actions were a rebellion, echoing the growing calls for women's independence on distant city airwaves. I'd used the Carters' greed and Sarah's ambition against them, turning their lies into a public spectacle. As I held Lily, I felt a pang, not for her, Sarah's child, but for the love I'd poured into her. The $2,000 in my pocket was my freedom, but the real victory was watching Ethan and Sarah crumble, their dream of a new life reduced to ashes. The autumn of 1980 swept through Willow Creek, Ohio, with a chill that mirrored the cold satisfaction in my heart. I, Mary Thompson, had returned from Fort Campbell, where I'd exposed Ethan's affair with Sarah, his brother's widow, shattering their reputations and ending his military career. Reborn, with memories of my past life where I'd slaved for the Carters, raised Sarah's daughter Lily as my own, and died confronting their lies, I was no longer their pawn. The divine voice that had granted me this second chance, whispering, "Your pain demands justice," fueled my every move. Back in Willow Creek, the town buzzed with gossip, the Carters' disgrace a firestorm I'd ignited. Ethan and Sarah returned in shame, their heads bowed as neighbors gawked. Margaret and Henry, my in-laws, greeted them with fury, their dreams of a prosperous son crushed. Sarah, once pampered, was now a pariah, and her pregnancy with Ethan's twins was a scandal whispered in church pews. I stayed in Clara's farmhouse, my $2,000 from Sarah's extortion a lifeline, but my work wasn't done. In my past life, Margaret and Henry had faked injuries to keep me trapped. Now I'd ensure their downfall was real. The Carters' staircase was rickety, which I'd noted in my first life. One night I crept in, deepening a crack in a critical step with a chisel. Days later, Margaret tumbled, her spine fracturing. She'd never walk again. Henry was next. I knew he hiked the hills to cut grass, a routine from my past life. I scattered a few dollar bills near a ravine's edge, his greed a predictable lure. He fell legs snapping and was bedridden by dusk. The town called it karma, but I knew better. It was my hand guided by justice. With Margaret and Henry immobile, Sarah became their caregiver, a role her delicate hands weren't built for. She cooked, cleaned bedpans, and endured Margaret's venomous rants. "You ruined us, you leech!" Margaret screamed, blaming Sarah for Ethan's discharge. After 2 weeks, Sarah snapped. In a heated fight, she shoved Margaret, who fell from her bed, her head striking a table's edge. Blood pooled, and Margaret died. Sarah, collapsing in panic, miscarried her twins, her screams echoing as Ethan rushed her to the hospital. Sarah faced prison for manslaughter, her trial a spectacle in Willow Creek. The town, rooted in 1980s rural values where family loyalty was sacred, turned on her. She seduced her brother-in-law. They hissed at the diner. Ethan Broken returned to the farmhouse. Now a shell with his parents gone, I saw my chance to deliver the final blow. At the town square with Lily at my side, I faced a crowd. "Lily's not my daughter," I declared, my voice steady. "She's Sarah's, swapped at birth to keep me slaving for the Carters. My son died, and they lied to trap me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan stumbling forward, his face gaunt, choked. "Mary, is that true?" I nodded cold. "You didn't know, but it doesn't matter. She's yours now." I pushed Lily toward him and walked away, her cries fading behind me. Clara, my rock, stood by me, her strength forged through years of defying Willow Creek's judgment bolstering mine. "You've torn them down, Mary," she said, her eyes gleaming. In rural Ohio, where women were expected to endure my rebellion, was a shockwave echoing the growing feminist stirrings of the era. The Carters were finished, Margaret dead, Henry crippled, Sarah jailed, Ethan disgraced. I'd used my reborn knowledge to orchestrate their fall, and as I packed my bags with the $2,000, I felt the weight of my past life lift. Justice wasn't karma mine, crafted with precision and delivered without mercy. By 1990, Mary Thompson, had left Willow Creek's dusty fields far behind, trading Ohio's rural grind for Chicago's bustling streets. The $2,000 I'd extorted from Sarah in 1980 was my seed money planted in the fertile ground of America's economic boom. Reagan's policies had opened doors, and I seized them, starting with a street stall, selling handmade quilts. My reborn knowledge trends I'd seen in my past life, like the rise of boutique retail, guided me. By 1985, I'd opened my first store, then 3 more, building a small empire of home goods that caught the eye of city shoppers. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving, a woman carving her own path in a world where independence was still a battle. In 1987, I met James, a kind-hearted entrepreneur who ran a hardware store. Unlike Ethan, James saw me not as a workhorse, but as a partner. Over coffee in a Chicago diner, he shared his dreams of building a community, not just a business. His honesty, his quiet strength won me over. We married in 1989, a simple ceremony under Lake Michigan's glow, far from Willow Creek's judgment. In 1992, I gave birth to our son Noah, his laughter a balm to the scars of my past. Each night, as I tucked him in, I felt the nightmare of the Carters fade, replaced by a peace I'd never known. Claire's letters kept me tethered to Willow Creek. She'd moved to Dayton, trading farm life for a job in a textile factory, her hair now permed, her confidence radiant. In 1993, we met for dinner in Chicago, her high heels clicking on the restaurant floor. Over wine, she shared the Carters' fate. Sarah, released after 8 years in prison for Margaret's death, returned to Willow Creek, hoping to rebuild with Ethan. He took her back, a broken man caring for the crippled Henry and Lily, now 15, and increasingly withdrawn. On their wedding night, Lily snapped, stabbing Sarah repeatedly, muttering, "You ruined me. I should have been cured." Her mind, fractured by years of neglect and the truth of her parentage, landed her in a mental institution. Ethan, working as a $500 a month security guard, was alone when Henry died soon after. I felt no sympathy, only a quiet satisfaction. My revenge, loosening Margaret's stare, luring Henry to that ravine, had unraveled their world. Clara's eyes softened. "You got justice, Mary, but you've built more than that." She was right. In Chicago, I'd found not just success, but love, a family free of lies. The 1980s had been a turning point with women like me, pushing against tradition inspired by distant city movements. I'd rewritten my story not just through vengeance, but through creation. In 1994, fate dealt one last card. On a family trip to a Chicago hotel, I saw Ethan outside his security uniform. Faded his face aged beyond his years. He stopped me, his voice low. Mary, you came back, didn't you? I did too after you died. I tried to fix things, but it was too late. I didn't know about Lily or the switch. Sarah tricked me, and I'm sorry. His words hinted at his rebirth, a parallel to mine, but they held no weight. I'd seen his guilt in my past life, his excuses after my death. You think an apology erases what you did? I said, my voice ice. I'll never forgive you, Ethan. Not now, not ever. I walked away, Noah's hand in mine, James at my side, leaving Ethan to his regrets. I reflected on my journey as we drove home, Chicago's skyline gleaming. Revenge had freed me, stripping the Carters of their power, but love, James's steadiness, Noah's laughter. Clara's friendship had healed me. In my past life, I'd believed in karma, but now I knew better. Justice was mine to forge, and I'd wielded it with precision. The Carters were a distant memory, their downfall a testament to my strength. I looked at Noah asleep in the back seat and smiled. My new life wasn't just a victory, it was a promise kept to myself and the divine voice that had given me this chance.